chapter, beginning with the 15th verse. When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the man who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first one said, 'I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married and can't come.' The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servants, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, 'what you ordered has been done, but there is still room.' Then the master told his servants, 'Go out to the roads and country lanes and make them come in so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those men who were invited will get a taste of my banquet.'" You ever throw a party and nobody shows up? I did once, but we could blame it on the weather because there was an ice storm the day I had the party scheduled. So I was understandable why nobody showed up, but it was still disappointing. And because the ice storm didn't start until real close to the time of the party, I had all the food ready, and we ate leftover chicken wings for weeks because people weren't there to eat them. But imagine throwing a party and the weather's nice and you didn't make a mistake and scheduled the opposite of an IU basketball game or something, and people don't show up and nobody shows up. Disappointing that must feel. I see online every so often stories of little children who have birthday parties and none of the guests show up. And then the mom posts it online and the fire department or the police department show up and bring gifts to the boy. And while that's a heartfelt story, it's still gotta hurt for that child to know that all the kids he invited from school didn't bother to come. Maybe they'd even said they'd be there and didn't bother to come. Feeling unloved because your celebration wasn't important enough to the people you invited to share it with. Now, who are we supposed to be in this parable? Well, it's a parable about the kingdom of God. So we're not the owner of the house. That's God. God's the one throwing the banquet. And to start off, God is acting just like everybody else. You know, when you have a party, you want to invite all the right people to show up. Now, I've never had that kind of a party where I've had to invite the right people to show up. You know, never had a party where it was about schmoozing with somebody to improve my job or something. Never felt like, you know, I gotta have all the right people at my party. I didn't hang out with the popular kids, so I didn't bother inviting them to my parties, which was good because then I didn't have to worry about what happens if I invite them and they don't show up. But I knew people who, you know, when they were having a party and they wanted to convince somebody to come, they would tell them the names of other people who had already been invited. Oh yeah, John's going to be there. And Paul's going to be there. Susan's going to be there. You like Susan, don't you? You need to come to the party. And that's what that's what God does. He invites all the important people to the party. And all the important people have excuses. Life gets in the way for them of coming to the party. None of them have a bad excuse, really. Now, I don't know about the guy who bought the land and he hasn't seen it yet. That might be a mistake, but if I bought new property and hadn't seen it, yeah, I want to go see if I got a good deal or not. Same with the oxen, and certainly the guy who just said, I just got married. Now, I'm sure the master would say, well, bring your wife too, but these aren't bad excuses. It's not like they're making things up. But if life got in the way. Now, we in this story are the master's servants. So we're the ones, and we went out and we asked all these people to come to the party, and they all had excuses. Now, we've been there. How many of you have ever invited someone to come to church? And they gave you a reason why they couldn't come. And so what do? We give up. Let's face it, that's what we do. Notice the master didn't say, go back to those people who said no and ask them again. That's what we do if we don't give up. I really want this person to come to my church, so I'm going to keep bothering them, and I'm going to keep asking them to come to church. The master didn't say to do that. Because the problem is who we invite and why we invite them. And the problem for most of this can be laid on all of the church growth movement and the church growth literature about who you want to invite to your church. Now, I've attended more than one conference on church growth. And I had one where the lead started out by going, okay, when people talk about church growth, who do they say they want to invite? They want young people to come to the church, right? Because they look out and they see all the gray hairs, so they want young people to come. He goes, you don't want young people. Young people are busy. They have jobs, they have families, and you know what they don't have? They don't have money. What are you going to get out of them coming to church? And that's when it hit me that the whole church growth movement was wrong. Because the church growth movement focuses on the church. We want to bring these people into church because they can do something for us. Even if it's just make the numbers on our attendance and our finances look better. It's about, we want these people here because of what they can do for us. All those people that the master invited to the banquet that had an excuse for not coming, I bet every single one of them ate well that day. They may not have had the feast that the master offered, but they didn't go to bed hungry either. But when they refused, the master sent the servants out again and says, go out into town and get all of the people you can round up in town. All of the people who have nothing to offer you. Have we ever invited anybody to church who has nothing to offer it? Who has nothing to offer us? Have we ever invited someone to church who's going to need from us, who's going to take from us more than they have to give? Because the people that God tells the servants to go and invite are those who have nothing to offer. They are the people who are going to come into the feast, and it may be the first decent meal they've had in a week. I remember one time I was at a church and people were praying that God would send people to the church. And I asked them, I said, are you sure you want that? Are you sure you want God to send people? Or do you have specific people in mind? There was a time, and I forget which coach it was, but it was after the heyday of the Boston Celtics, and they had hired a new head coach. And they asked him about who we wanted to bring in. And he goes, well, I can tell you this. Larry Bird's not walking through that door. You know, we can't get Larry Bird back. We're going to get somebody different. If God sends people to this church, and I'm going to tell you what I told that church, they're going to be different than you. Because God is probably not going to take somebody from the church down the road who just got upset with their pastor and send them to us. He may send us people who don't know him. Certainly he wants us to invite people who don't know him. Now, I've never thought of myself as a prophet, but when I told the people of the church, I said, you're not ready for God to send you people. They're going to be different than you. The very next Sunday, we had a single black mother come to visit us at church. Not a single person of color in the church before she showed up. They were very welcoming of her, I have to admit. And she had no financial gifts to give us. She was a single mother raising her child by herself, working 2 jobs to do it. She came to the church because she needed the church. And they did pretty well, and then she got a new job and had to move. And then God sent us Bob. And we were a lot more prepared for that black single mother than we were for Bob. Bob was an alcoholic. And Bob had nothing to offer the church. And when you went to shake his hand, you wanted to go wipe your hand off as soon as he was done shaking it. And you didn't want to sit next to him, not because he wasn't a nice person, but because you could smell the alcohol on his breath. I don't know that he ever put more than $1 in the offering plate on any Sunday. I do know that that was a sacrifice for him when he did it. I do know that was $1 he would have rather spent on alcohol. And I must say, I was prouder of that church than I ever thought I would be. Because they didn't care that Bob had nothing to offer us. And yes, it was difficult for them to welcome Bob because Bob was not a person it was easy to welcome. He didn't know the Bible. He didn't know the rules of the church. He remembered a few things from when he grew up in Sunday school, but he got them all mixed up. But they knew that the church had something that Bob needed. And Bob was not Bob was a regular attender for a couple of months, and then he showed up to church one time completely drunk. And then he didn't show up again for the next 6 months. Embarrassed, upset with himself for what he'd done, thinking that we all hated him. And then when he reached the bottom of his rope, when he'd been arrested for trying to shoplift from the local liquor store, he made his way back to church. And to his shock, he was welcomed back. I'll be honest, to my shock, he was welcomed back. But he was told he was not allowed to show up at church drunk ever again. And if he showed up at church drunk, he would be shown the door. And that when he was sober, he'd come back, but he was not allowed to be there drunk. That was 12 years ago. That was the last drink he took. He never had a thing to offer that church. But he was welcomed. He was invited. I think too often we invite the people to church who can do something for us. When our neighborhood, our county, our towns are filled with people who need us, who need what we have to offer. Don't keep inviting the same people who keep making excuses as to why they can't come. Invite the people who need what we have and who have nothing to give us but their presence. Our closing hymn is number 675, I Gave My Life for Thee.